Welcome to Wisdom from the Aerial View, a podcast about learning to live in a world that seems unsettled, fraught with agitation, fear, and social disturbance, but one filled too with a yearning for peace, stability, and kindness. On this podcast, two old friends sit and ponder if we can have both. Can we go from an unsettled world to a peaceful one? Can we go from fear to hope? Can we go from selfish to selfless? On today's podcast, I want to talk about a response we received from one of our listeners. And by the way, we do want to hear from you. Write to us. Let us know your thoughts. Do you agree with what we're saying? Do you agree with what we're bringing up? Do you want to take us to task? You see, Mark and I don't always agree either. And I think that's what makes it interesting. So today, I want to read some excerpts from a friend of ours, actually a friend of Mark's, who wrote to us. He says, "You often say that terrible things, terrible rifts, happen all the time. So the aerial view prevents overreacting. I agree that we shouldn't see every moment as a disaster. But the journey from self to selfless has economic realities. When facing poverty, unemployment, hunger, or insufficient resources, survival becomes paramount. To dismiss these struggles as mere blips on human chronology is kind of ridiculous. What say you?"
You know, the person who wrote that is a very smart guy and very learned, read a million books. So when he says something, I always pay attention. And I started to laugh when I read that because I think, oh crap, he figured it out. His point's excellent. You know, we talk about the street view versus the aerial view. The street view being where everything happens, or all of life occurs. And the aerial view is that perspective where we move from the street view. We become that independent, disinterested observer just watching. So I think his point is, okay, it's great to be in the aerial view, but when you're watching down there and you're seeing poverty and disease and cruelty and so on, what do you just sit in the aerial view and slough it off and say no big deal? So his point, which I assume somebody would get to eventually. And of course, I'm not surprised he did since he's such a smart guy. So this is a very difficult one to answer because the answer is a bit troubling even to me. Let me start with a ridiculous statement. That always seems to go over well. So, you know, one of my former books, I think my second book, I was thinking of titling, "If Abraham Lincoln hadn't been assassinated, he'd still be dead now." Meaning that no matter what, you know, everybody ends up leaving this earth. And so you can't get away from that. And when you realize that, you have to say to yourself, okay, well, how big a deal is it? You know, where on that timeline of your life do you leave this earth? You know, our natural instinct, certainly mine, I know yours and almost everybody's, is, you know, when you see a child who's ill or sadly passes away, that is crushing to the parents, siblings, everybody in the family. And even those of us who don't know that person, it's extremely sad when you hear about it on the news or read about it somewhere. And then you stop and think, you go, yes, but even if that child had not passed away at this point, at some point, that child would. Okay, so where does that leave us? That sounds very, very harsh. And it is very harsh. And the reason it's harsh is because we say, well, great, well, that child just lost the chance to get educated, to make friends, perhaps to find a significant other, have children, whatever. That child missed all that. That is a tragedy by definition. And I completely agree with that. But from the aerial view, you're stuck taking a slightly different perspective. Some people would call it callous or aloof, which is what my friend referred to. But it's there. You can't miss it. You're in the aerial view. That's the problem with the aerial view, that even though it's extremely comforting and allows us to visualize our lives in context and take things from a point of view that maybe is a little less personal and a little more objective, it does leave us with some of these conundrums like, okay, if I'm looking at this person's life and it's cut short by X number of years, obviously the more number of years is cut short by, the more upset we are. It doesn't change the fact that each of us is on a limited number of records in what we refer to as the jukebox of time. And so when you're looking, you go, okay, does it matter whether you're on 5 records or 5,000 records? Now, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who I think we've mentioned before, for those people who don't know who she is, she was a very famous psychiatrist, and she wrote the book on death and dying, literally called On Death and Dying. And most of us have heard of it, the 5 stages of grief, denial, acceptance, anger. I'm probably getting them out of order, but you get the idea. But if you asked her a different question, which is, how important is longevity? How important is it to live a long life? She would say, it's not important at all. And in fact, a life can be a single day and still have value. And that's an aerial view point of view for sure. Only in the aerial view could you possibly come up with that. Because those of us in the street view would say, what are you talking about? Losing a child, even at birth or soon after or any time. When is it okay to pass away? Well, we'd say, well, people in their 60s, that's kind of early these days. People in the 70s, when you get to 95, everybody's saying, okay, it was a great life. But so there's a continuum along that process. But clearly, the earlier, the more we lose somebody, the more upset we are. But Elizabeth Kubler-Ross would say, no need to feel that way. A life can be of value in a single day. And the only way you can appreciate that is from the aerial view, to see life in context, to understand that every life is limited. We are on only a limited number of records in the jukebox, no matter who we are, no matter how famous, how rich, how brilliant, how accomplished. We only get a certain number of records in which we're on. From the moment we're born to the moment we die, that we call our lifespan, those records that we're on. So my friend's point is a really, really tough one to deal with. And it depends whether you're in the street view, evaluating its significance, or whether you're in the aerial view. And the aerial view does have a certain callousness to it. I would admit that. And that's, I think, what he was pointing out.
Is there no sadness in the
There's
aerial
no
view?
sadness in the aerial
If I'm
view.
up there, no sadness.
No.
No sadness.
That's the crazy part about it. And that's
right.
I knew at some point somebody would hit me over the head with this.
Yeah, but that's why his point is so well taken. I mean, I don't know him, but I want to know him because I think he's right. He's spot on. He and I agree on a lot of things, I gather. But I don't understand why you'd want to elevate to an aerial view where there's literally no compassion and no heart. Explain that to me.
Okay. I wouldn't say there's no compassion or there's no heart, because the person in the aerial view, let's say you or I are taking a trip to the aerial view and we're kind of seeing what's going on in context. We're still people of compassion, and we're still people of heart, right? Because we still do live in the street view and we can see and appreciate the street view. The point of the aerial view, it's not that it's a heartless place, but that it's a place that allows us to understand why in the world we're here. What is the point of life? And really, it's only in the aerial view that you can really get that appreciation, that aha, it's a limited time engagement. No matter who we are, no matter our accomplishments, our wealth, etc., it's a limited time engagement. We start on day one and we end on whatever day. We don't know what it is, but we have a mission, that we're on a mission during that time. We've discussed that. What's our mission? To prepare. And what are we preparing for? It's not clear, although I do believe we're preparing for something. I think that's what all the facts, I wouldn't say facts, all the clues in our life point to. We've discussed a lot of them. But that at the end of the day, it's to make that evolution from selfish to selfless, from inward focus to outward focus. That's what the aerial view allows you to do. It also allows you, and we talked about this, it allows you to experience tragedy or difficult times in a less painful manner, because you can appreciate what it means. When you're in the street view and bad things happen, it hurts. Whether it be physical pain or the loss of somebody or watching something terrible to happen to somebody. One of the problems with the news, whether you get it on TikTok or cable TV or from a newspaper, old school, most of it's bad. You don't see a lot of great stories of all these wonderful things that are happening every day. And why is that? We know. Because
bad news sells, right?
Bad news sells, right. Okay. But it really can sink you, right? It can really make all of us, especially now since it's ubiquitous, it's hard to keep a very positive attitude when all you're seeing are negative things going on in the world. We talked about politics now and how the country is split. And there are those people who think the current situation is fantastic and others think it's the worst thing that ever happened to the United States. So we're kind of split pretty much down the middle, pretty close.
Could one argue then that, let's look at that, that split screen, if you will. Can one argue that some are looking at it from the street view and some are looking at it from the aerial view?
I think almost everybody's looking at it in the street view, which is why it's so difficult, which is why we fight. which is why we have this contentiousness. It's only when you get out of the street view that you can say, oh, that's so foolish. There's nothing to fight about. Let's go back to sports. We love sports analogies, you and I.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about this before. And I'm a Washington Capitals fan because I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I love the Washington Capitals, and they're doing great. And Alex Ovechkin is on the verge of breaking the all-time goal record. And so I'm hoping that the Washington Capitals win the cup again this year. They got a fair enough chance. They got the best record in the league, but that doesn't always mean they're going to win. And then I remember how I felt the last time they won. I felt fantastic. It was a joke with my wife and me, because I would stop people on the street. I go, hey, by the way, the Caps won the cup. And this went on for like a month or so. Right? And it was a joke. It was funny. But I really was happy. Why? Because this team had struggled for all these years and never won. And they had some great teams and they never won. I felt badly for them. And, nobody wants to be a perpetual loser. But when you're in a city where your teams never win, you kind of take on that persona somewhat. And then you realize as soon as they win the cup that a few months later, everybody's back in training camp and somebody else is likely to win the cup, and that your championship lasted a year. Now, Kansas City won 2 Super Bowls in a row. Pittsburgh Penguins won 2 cups in a row. Other teams have won multiple championships in a row. But most of the time, eventually that team is not going to be the champion. And you think, well, why did I get so upset or so excited? Because it's over before you know it, and somebody else is going to be the champion, right? And that is once you get to that, that's a very aerial view perspective, meaning it's fine to enjoy the victory, but don't take it out of context, right? You're one champion out of 100 or whatever number of seasons of champions have been in your particular sport. It's going to change. So why in the world are we letting our emotions, our attitudes be so dependent on whether our team wins or not? And that happens a lot. And then it's your political party, right? Now it's your political party, because political parties are like sports teams, right? Your political party loses and you're distraught and the country's a mess and it's going to hell in a handbasket. And both sides feel that way when the other team wins, by the way.
Except one side decides that the loss wasn't a loss.
Okay, well, we're not...
No.
Okay.
I'm actually serious about that. If you're in the street view, when do you reconcile reality from fantasy?
No, if you're in the street view, it's reality, right? Yes, everything you say is true. Did one party refuse to accept an election? Yeah, but if you ask that party, they would say to you, this is why the street view is so dangerous and the aerial view is so beneficial. So I'll give you an example of that one. So I don't have a particular horse in the race politically, right? I just kind of watch. I don't get upset as you do, or a lot of my friends do. And I have no idea what's going to happen, nor does anybody else. That's just the way the world works. If you think you know, you're fooling yourself. You don't know. Nobody knows. So in politics, when you're in the midst of it, again, it's just like being in a sporting event, right? And so both sides in a sporting event, when there's a penalty called, and half people say, oh, that was a terrible call. And the other people say it was a great call. Well, if you go back to that election situation, a lot of the people still believe that there were shenanigans in that election. Now, of course, there were 60 cases brought to the courts. They all thrown out. But you are never, ever going to convince those people that there wasn't shenanigans. And I would say, when I look at it objectively, I say, they could be right. I don't know. They could be right. Now, I know the legal cases showed that there was nothing, but they're not talking about. They're talking about suppression of speech and the Hunter Biden laptop and all these, during COVID, all these ballots got sent out willy-nilly, and who the heck knew who was getting a ballot. So I hear them. I don't have to agree with them, and I don't even know what the truth is. And I don't think we ever will. But I hear them. I don't get upset by it. I got upset by attacking the Capitol. That really upset me. I think I've told you, I felt like somebody was breaking into my house. That kind of violence is inexcusable. But I do understand people's feelings. So, when I hear people say one side didn't accept an election result, I go, okay, you have to understand how they're seeing it. In the aerial view, you get to see both sides. You don't have to give each side equal weight. You don't have to agree, but you see them. And that's the important thing, I believe, is just to see that there's another side. We're going to talk about how being right is overrated. Maybe not now, maybe in the future. We're going to get to that because it's unavoidable when we talk about these kind of things.
It is.
Being right is overrated.
Right. I was just going to ask you, is there a right and wrong? Is there such a thing as right and wrong?
Well, that's a really good, tough question because if you believe, why do we have the Ten Commandments? Why do we have any religion? Well, we're just going to use the Judeo-Christian one because it's easier. But I'm not ignoring all the other religions on earth. They all have equal value as far as I'm concerned. But let's just stick with the Judeo-Christian Ten Commandments. So why do the Ten Commandments exist? Because there are certain things that are just, you can't do. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not kill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thou shalt not covet, right? Etc. So we have set these absolute standards that we have decided are not man-made, that they come from some divine source. Those who believe in the Judeo-Christian religions believe that the Ten Commandments came from a divine source. From Moses have those tablets, comes down from Mount Sinai, and bang, these are 10 rules from God. You got to follow them. So they're not man-made rules. Man-made rules are really challenging because who gets to decide what they are, right? Which man, which woman, who gets to decide? When you have divine rules, okay, we've set a different standard. You can't do these things. Once you get away from that, it's a real problem, which is why if God doesn't exist, we still need to invent him or her. We still need an absolute authority because otherwise it's a total mess. You got a mess on your hands. The only way out of that mess without some divine concept is the aerial view. The aerial view exists and because it allows to get to the same place without having to have a religion or a divine entity. So people ask me all the time, do I believe in God? I believe in something. I don't even know what to call it. But yes, I do believe in something. Can I prove it? Of course not. But I also know I believe in the aerial view, which that allows you to it doesn't set absolute standards, but allows you to view things in a perspective that does lead you to some, I don't want to call them absolutes, but some rules. For instance, it is very clear from the aerial view that war is a terrible thing. That people die, people get displaced, nothing good ever happens. I feel that way about all of violence. This is very obvious from the aerial view. It's not so obvious in the street view because if somebody, punches you, you're probably going to want to punch him or her back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's leave out the women. Just punch him back. I'm kind of old school. I don't think you should be punching women. But
thank you.
You see my point that
I do.
The aerial view the perspective is so important because it places everything in context. It allows you to judge people more favorably. It allows you to open your mind to different points of view. It allows you to evaluate things like, was an election legitimate or not from a different point of view, hearing both sides, not necessarily agreeing with one side or the other, but just seeing it.
Yeah. Right.
So this is why this is so important. So getting back to my friend's letter, which is what we started with, his point is that the aerial view looks kind of callous. It looks kind of uncaring. And you mentioned those exact words. And in some ways, you can see it as it is, but don't let that bother you. We don't need to have compassion and caring in the aerial view. We need that in the street view. That's where it counts. Being caring, being generous, being forgiving, judging favorably. These things we desperately need in the street view. We don't have to worry about them in the aerial view. That's not where the interactions among humans takes place. Or interactions with the world. That all happens in the street view. In the area view, we don't have to worry about that. That's a perspective. That's a way to view things in a way that will allow us to understand our place on this earth and why we're here.
Well, then let me go further in his note to you, which I adore. He says, "You have only one life to live." He quotes you, and he says, "What happened to the ever-enduring jukebox? We do have one life, and daily upheavals matter. One statistic about nearly 60% of children from low-income communities coming to school hungry is alarming, and it's only gotten worse. Amen. Yet, we're still discussing cutting Medicaid to provide tax breaks for the wealthy. This is not acceptable. What we need are two elements: faith in the leaders that they are being fair, and hope for the followers that they can better themselves into a happier economic life." Obviously, I agree with everything he says. And I know, again, that's a difficult thing to kind of wrap your head around. But he's serious, he's honest, and I believe that he's right on point. So how do you reconcile that with the street view and the area view? How do you reconcile that? And what did you say to your friend? Because I know you sent him an answer. I loved your answer. Let's talk about that.
Right. So I think there's a little confusion between one life and the jukebox of time. We only get one life, as far as we know. We're going to go with that. We're going to stick with that one because there's no evidence that you get more than one. But let's just stick with that. Okay. It's not that important, really. But the jukebox of time tells us that every moment of that life, all those records that you're on from the moment of your birth to the moment of your death, your lifespan, you're on every one of those records. And each one of those records is playing in perpetuity, meaning there is no such thing as a single now. It is now on every one of those records. Every one of those records is happening just as accurately as the moment we're talking right now. So moments in the past, which we say, oh, that's history, that's gone. No. It is history to us, but they're all actively happening. Every moment actively happens. And the reason I call it the jukebox of time is because every record is, the way to think about it is each record is a moment of time. And just like every record is playing in our jukebox of time simultaneously and forever, every moment of time is happening actively and forever. They're always active. So as you and I have talked, when you were sitting with your mother and she was passing away, that moment is still happening. When you were a kid and we were at your house in your basement in junior high school having a party with our friends, that's still happening. Every moment is still happening. That's different than having a single life. Now let's getting back to the other point is that in the street view, things do matter, right? It matters whether we feed children or adults. I know, those of you who I've reminded people, our listeners many times that Enid's been involved in feeding people for her entire career. This is what she does. Nobody knows more about hunger and how to address hunger than Enid. So yes, these are very real events. Street view events are very real events. And because there's an aerial view does not mean we are not responsible in the street view. Exactly the opposite. We are very responsible in the street view. We're responsible for taking care of each other, for being kind to each other, to feeding the hungry, to make sure we take care of our fellow citizens, our fellow men and women and children. Yes, we are very responsible. That's the whole point. Remember, we're here to evolve from selfish to selfless, from inward to outward focus. That's 100% street view stuff, right? The aerial view allows us to see all these things in perspective, to not get so upset when bad things happen, to understand that our time on earth is limited, and therefore what we do in the street view is extremely important, right? The aerial view allows us to look at events that might really upset us, like elections, and see them in perspective, or even wars, even horrible things like that, to see that, gee, they've been occurring forever. And they're likely to continue occurring forever. And the question is, why don't we learn from these things? Yes, we learn from them, but our individual goals supersede those of the society. And so we're going to keep doing the same things again and again and again. They're unlikely to go away, unless something like this podcast that you and I have dedicated our time to can convince people that there's a better way. I know, tall order, but we're trying, right?
Well, so let's go back. So we were in the street view and things are happening and things are not good. And there's a war, there's famine, et cetera, et cetera. We then go into the aerial view to look at it from a different perspective. Do we then come down and realize we can change the bad and make it better? Is that the purpose, basically, of going from the street view to the area view, from going from selfish to selfless, by coming back down from the aerial view into the street view and making it better, making things right?
Yeah, of course. That's why we're here. We live in the street view. I live in the street view just like you do, right?
Right.
And that's where we have to affect the change. The change is created in the street view. We have to help each other in the street view. Nobody's helping each other in the aerial view. The aerial view is just a perspective, but that perspective helps us understand why we're here, that it is critical for us to be generous and kind and caring and help our neighbor. This is exactly what we're supposed to be doing. And we're supposed to be judging each other favorably, because from the aerial view, it is clear this political stuff is just laughable. It's laughable from the aerial view. In the street view, it's not so laughable. If somebody cuts somebody's benefits and somebody goes hungry or gets ill, well, that's not funny, right? It's very real in the street view. But from the aerial view, we understand that this is unfortunately the way the world works. And the world works this way because each of us is indeed on a mission. I know people listen to this and think I'm some proselytizing maniac, But I'm absolutely nothing like at all like that. What I'm saying is the aerial view gives you the perspective to understand why in the world you're here, why it matters how you treat people, why it's important to be kind and generous and caring. That's what you're here for. That's what you understand from the aerial view. Why in the world do societies repeat again and again and again? A good friend of mine wrote a book with Steve Forbes actually a few years ago comparing the current situation in the United States to the fall of Rome, right? My friend's very erudite historian. And if you go back in time, he's great to talk to because he knows, he knows a lot about ancient history, and he always quoting some famous historical character or explaining why this mirrors what happened in Carthage or something like that. It's fascinating to talk to him, but he has that perspective, right? And that's the point. These things happen again and again, not just as societies, but each of us repeats the same things as all those who came before, our parents and grandparents, the interpersonal relationships, the struggles, the anxiety, the emotional ups and downs. This happens to everybody. Well, when you stop and think of it, that's a little strange. Why? It's happened to billions of people before. Haven't we figured it out? Don't we understand how to have optimal relationships, how to behave appropriately, how to create an optimal society? We've had all these years of history, of human history, a couple 100,000 years. How come we haven't figured it out? Well, it's not that we haven't figured it out. It's that each of us is required to play out this exact same scenario. I like to say the set changes, whether it's the year 1000, the year 2000, it doesn't matter. The clothing is different. The set is different. The modes of transportation and communication are different. But the story is always the same. The story of interpersonal relationships, how we treat each other, how we interact with our planet, these never change. That's what you get to appreciate from the area view. And then the light goes on and you go, I get why I'm here. I see that I'm repeating all that came before, but now I understand what I need to do. I don't have to worry about becoming the most famous or the wealthiest or the most powerful, because that's all going to go to zero the day I die. That's very transient. But what isn't going to go to zero is my effect on other people, who then will affect other people, who then will affect other people. And that goes on forever, right? Generation upon generation. So, you see children of alcoholics often become alcoholics, right? Well, children of people who have figured it out and understand what it is to be a kind, generous, caring person who understands that others are more important than them, pass that on to their children. And they teach their friends and then their children. And before you know it, you got a pretty good lineage of people who are doing really good things in the world.
And that's really the only way we can affect change, by being better ourselves. Is that the thesis here?
Yeah, of course. Just, if you just focus, your life is transient. It's temporary. It's not about fame, fortune, or power. That's going to all go to zero eventually. And you will not be remembered, most likely, for very long, right? So that's not the point. The point is not to be remembered. The point is not to get wealthy or powerful. The point is to make that evolution, that transition from selfish to selfless, from inward to outward focus, to have an impact on as many people, positive impact on as many people as possible. That's the point. That's what's obvious from the aerial view. That's the answer to my friend's question.
And that's great. And that's so important. I was thinking the other day, rereading the book again. We talking about, because we were in high school together in junior high. And one of the things that I wrote in my own yearbook was I wanted to leave footsteps in the sands of time. Well, the more you think about that, the ocean's going to come in and wipe it out. There are no footsteps in the sands of time. And that's exactly what your point is. And that's the reason that we're talking about wisdom from the aerial view. I want to close this by reading something from your book, because I think it's really important. You said, I recall an encounter some years ago with a patient 85 years of age. She was seated in front of me in the exam room. I had just told her that the test I had performed on her was completely normal. Yet I could see that her concern had not abated. So, you're sure that I'm fine? Actually, I began, I do see one problem. What is the problem? She asked anxiously. You're 85 and still in excellent health, I responded. I know that you're overwhelmed by the thought that your next medical problem might be one that leads to your death. But when you think about it, with all that worrying stealing your life, you're hardly living. You're right, Doc. We got to go live our lives, be good people, be better people, and pass that on. This book helps. The aerial view is the way we get there. I thank you. Before we leave, tell everybody how to write in so that we can get more wonderful notes like this? Can you tell it? What's the address?
Just send an email to question@wisdomfromtheaerialview.com. Question@wisdomfromtheaerialview.com. We'd love to get your comments and criticisms, suggestions, anything you want. We're open to everything.
Absolutely.
And Enid, thank you for another great episode, and thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.